Okay, this is part 8 of Federalist number 6. We'll start with paragraph 9. It starts with the plausibility of this objection will vanish the moment we advert to the essential difference between a mere non-compliance and a direct and active resistance. If the interposition of the state legislatures be necessary to give effect to a measure of the Union, they have only not to act, or to act evasively, and the measure is defeated. This neglect of duty may be disguised under affected but unsubstantial provisions so as not to appear, and of course not to excite any alarm in the people for the safety of the Constitution. The state leaders may even make a merit of their surreptitious invasions of it on the ground of some temporary convenience, exemption, or advantage. Remember, in the last part, we talked about the most important part of this paragraph, this Federalist, and why in a union it's important for the federal law to be applicable to the citizens of all of the union. And if it's a confederacy, then it's not good, because in the last part it said the federal government has got to be in a way where people have, the heart of the people is with the federal government. They know that when there's an emergency, federal government will be there for them. When it's their security and safety, federal government will be there for them. If sometimes even their state abuses their rights and privileges, the federal government will be there to protect them. But here he's still saying, if we have a confederacy, a weak union, then the legislatures of states may act like they care about what the federal government does. But in reality, they don't. They might be evasive. Okay? They might actually not follow the rules and agreements. And if they do half-heartedly. They act like they do, but they won't. And they'll find all sorts of excuses for their citizens. Yeah, this is the reason we are doing this. We are taking our time. We don't want to follow all of this law. We just want to follow half of it, which is best for you. And on, Publius says, this is awful for your future. This is not good, because then states will say, well, maybe the northern states are taking advantage of the situation and the southern states are not benefiting from it, and they'll start, northern and southern states will go against each other. They say maybe the middle states are taking advantage of it, then the northern and southern states will be against the middle states. So he's talking to you about all these scenarios that if you don't have a union, all these situations might happen. And when that happens, there's constantly a chance for war. And war is not good for your future, he says. We know it's waste of energy, waste of time, most importantly, waste of human life and potentiality. And that's why we're working on this project. We think we have to start gradually put our tribal thoughts aside and start thinking about being citizen of this globe. I'm not saying the countries shouldn't be there. I'm not saying the states within countries shouldn't be there. I'm just saying that our tribalism should fade away and our heart and future happiness should also be looking forward to a union of all of the countries of the world, so that we as a member of the human family can help one another put warlike mentality, tribalism gradually aside and step into a better future. Okay, I'll go to paragraph 10. But if the execution of the laws of the national government should not require the intervention of the state legislatures, if they were to pass into immediate operations upon the citizens themselves, the particular governments could not interrupt their progress with an open and violent exertion of an unconstitutional power. When he says particular governments, remember, we've talked about this. He's talking about the state governments. So if the federal government's laws applies directly to the people, and the state governments do not get in the middle of that, he says this is a good situation. No omissions nor evasions would answer the end. They would be obliged to act, and in such a manner as would have no doubt that they had encroached on the national rights. So if a state government does something wrong, when there's a federal union, you'll know that the state government started violating the laws of the national government, and their encroachment, their stepping over their authority, stepping over their limit will be seen, will be noticed. An experiment of this nature would always be hazardous in the face of a constitution in any degree competent to its own defense, and of a people enlightened enough to distinguish between a legal exercise and a legal usurpation of power. So when we have a union, when everybody knows what the state governments can do, what the national government can do, they won't step out of their bounds, and there will be a happy medium. And then people, in that case, will be happy to see the national government as well as the state government do well and stick to their duties. Because if they don't, then people will, especially the state governments do not stick to their duties, people will start noticing that. The success of it would require not merely a factious majority in the legislature, but the concurrence of the courts of justice and of the body of the people. If the judges were not embarked in a conspiracy with the legislature, they would pronounce the resolutions of such a majority to be contrary to the supreme law of the land, unconstitutional and void. This is a very important part of this Federalist, because it's the first time that in the Federalist Papers he brings the idea of judicial review. Judicial review is when judges, federal judges, all judges, but especially federal judges, look at a law that has been passed, let's say by state, and they say the law is in violation of the Constitution. Under the Constitution of the United States, this law does not hold. So it's unconstitutional, it's void, it won't work. So he says, let's say we are in a union, like under this Constitution. Even if the state legislature did not do its job right, people or the courts will find out that the state legislature is not doing its job right, or is overstepping its bound. And if it passes a law, then the judges, the federal judges, will find it unconstitutional and void. It is not going to be accepted as law. So this is the first time that he mentions the idea of judicial review. And he's saying that unless everybody is corrupt in the society, the legislature, the people, the judges, that's the only time that the federal government cannot do anything about it. But he says we know that not all people are going to get corrupted. Maybe a faction, maybe a part, maybe an interested group will only look after their well-being and their future. But not all the judges, not the people. So they will be keeping an eye on the legislature. So here's another idea of checks and balances, division and separation of powers that we've looked at in the past. So this is very important. So we had two important things in this Federalist. Number one, federal laws must apply to the citizens of all the states, just like state laws do. Directly, you don't need the state to intervene, to go as in-between mediator. And then second, he suggests, or for the first time brings the idea of judicial review, shares it with the readers. And he continues, if the people were not tainted with the spirit of their state representatives, they, as the natural guardians of the Constitution, would throw their weight into the national scale and give it a decided preponderancy in the contest. So if people are decent and they are not corrupted by their leaders, they will be on the side of the national government and give more weight to what the national government says. Give the scale, the preponderancy, the weight and importance, and the backing to the federal government. Attempts of this kind would not often be made with levity or rashness, because they could seldom be made without danger to the authors, unless in cases of a tyrannical exercise of the federal authority. So unless the federal government becomes a tyrannical form of government, then we know that those state legislatures, if they're trying to do something wrong, they will be blocked by the people, because people will be on the side of the federal government too. Remember, he said that their hopes and fears would be for the federal government. They would love the federal government enough to know that federal government is not their enemy, but their friend.